This is a video explaining why we made a record weight that weighs almost nothing. I'm David Baker from Origin Live, and this is my dad and company founder, Mark. We have been making award-winning tone arms and turntables since 1986, with renowned for great sound quality and high performance in vinyl playback. And today we're going to be talking about, I guess, a bit of the kind of history and the prototyping stage and the development of one of our most popular products, the Gravity 2 record weight.
Yeah, okay. Well, I mean, the first question to ask is why would anyone want to use a record weight in the first place?
Yeah.
And there's two reasons. One is I should include record clamps in that phrase as well, because they both serve the same function. The first is to flatten the record, because some records have warps in them, so people want to make sure it's flat.
Mm.
And the second one is because it can improve the sound of the record.
Mm.
And how does it improve the sound of the record? Well, I think you need to just look at the vibration that's going into the record. It's the main reason it works.
From our cartridge, from our platter's bearing, from the belt drive or the direct drive, this thing is always creating vibration
Yeah,
because it's a moving object. It moves. So
yeah, it is a complex picture because even with the best record player that could theoretically completely isolate your record from any bearing noise, any motor noise, acoustic feedback that comes through, airborne and structure-borne, whatever. Even if you were to do that, the record still is vibrating quite seriously. And the reason that happens is because you've got your stylus, and if you can imagine, this is a huge view of your stylus tip, and it's sat in a groove which has lots of undulations. And it's coming towards you. Okay, now
yeah, okay. This is good. Yeah.
the force on that stylus tip is quite significant.
How?
When it's static, the generally accepted figure is about 1.2 tons per square inch
Wow.
bearing down on that tiny little surface. And I got taken to task once by quoting, what's the generally industry accepted standard of 8 tons per square inch? And someone did this calculation and said, oh, it's far too high. It's not 8 tons a square inch. But I believe it is 8 tons per square inch because the cartridge designers who have figured all this out have recognized that this is moving backwards and forwards at a tremendous speed.
So it's not just the pressure; it's the inertial
It's the
force as
sideway,
well.
yeah, because
Yeah.
basically if you imagine your stylus tip, if it's moving at 1 hertz, which is 1 cycle per second, it's going like this,
Yeah.
okay? But to bounce off the sidewall, it's got a little bit of momentum there,
Mm.
and before it goes back. It's just the way physics works,
So there's a
obviously.
recoil off of that.
Well, it's just like if I was to jump off my chair onto the floor, I've got a bit of momentum there, I'll feel the impact.
Yeah.
If I jump off a 3-story building, I'll feel, and I'm going faster.
You'll very much feel
I
the
will really
impact.
feel the impact.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay, so this thing is moving, say 1 hertz a second. Well, if you go up to say 10 hertz, which is 10, you can tell the speed is quite getting much higher. When you get up to 1,000 vibrations a second per
Yeah.
second,
And vinyl
it's
can
getting
do.
very high.
I think vinyl can do something like
It can go up to
4,000 or even
no,
8,
it goes
I
up to
think.
20. It's got to go up to 20,000 cycles per
Really?
second.
Wow.
Okay, the speed gets enormous. So even though your tip may be very small, there's got a lot of momentum there because of the speed. Because momentum is mass times acceleration, and it has to get anyway. That's the reason it's so high. And you can hear the chattering of this tiny little tip. If you put your ear to the record, you can hear it. You can hear the record, just the mechanical noise it's
The
making.
acoustic.
Yeah. So
Actual.
so
Yeah.
that's why your record surface is activated into vibration, and it goes out in ripples. at all the different frequencies. So if you've got
Yeah.
a high frequency, you'll have a high frequency ripple. If you've got a low frequency, you'll have a low
Yeah.
frequency ripple.
And this is interesting because it seems like for a while in turntable development, you got, the introduction of sprung suspension and stuff like this because a lot of people thought the big problem was from the floor and noise in
Yeah,
the environment, but actually perhaps more of the problem is actually in the mechanics of the
yeah,
turntable itself.
absolutely. Yeah,
Right.
yeah. And because this is so small, people make the mistake of thinking, well, it doesn't really matter. But the problem is what it's very difficult to factor in is that vibration is amplified 8,000 times,
Yeah.
which is absolutely huge.
And this is smaller than a human hair as well,
Yeah,
the size of this groove.
yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So there's a lot of vibration on our record surface. How does a record weight handle that?
How
Or,
does a record weight deal with it? Um, well, it's I don't want to get too deep into the weeds, but the idea is that it will absorb the vibration.
Mhm.
And there's two approaches to this problem. One is to try and, I mean, is to suck the record. I mean, like the extreme of a record weight is to suck the whole vinyl surface onto the platter. They sound like a fantastic idea. And it was tried, I think, by a deck called the Rockport 40 years ago.
Okay.
And the interesting thing was that it didn't sound the great sound that people expected at all.
Right.
It had a bit of a reputation for not living up to the kind of enormous expenditure because
Oh,
this,
no.
in its day, it was a hugely expensive deck, as you can imagine, because
That's
it's
expensive technology,
it
right?
is it's very expensive, and you've got to have an air pump in the background
Yeah.
going as well. But that idea hasn't died out. There are still decks around now that use it. And it was quite interesting that I was at the Munich show and a friend of mine referred a customer of hers to me. And he had a very expensive £70,000 deck that used this technique. And he was saying it sounds dull and lifeless
Mm.
and sterile, and not like my friend's deck, which was rated as the number one deck in Germany
Well, maybe we
by
should
various people.
shout out
Um,
Martina Schoner.
Yeah, Martina
Yeah.
Schoner. So we both unfortunately had to say to this chap that it was beyond recovery basically because that vacuum actually is like a very heavy record weight. It just kills and deadens the sound. They just suck any noise or any spurious noise out of the record, but they also suck out the delicacy of the real notes going through the record, which might sound difficult, but the reason that that happens is because there's two things going on. First of all, you've got to try and damp the vibration at source, but you also there is another technique which says let the vibration escape, and the only way it can do that is by vibrating the record. So what we prefer to do is to let the record vibrate, which also loses vibration, and then pick it up at the center with the record weight.
Right.
Okay, and the record weight absorbs the vibration and stops it.
And
But
that's
if you stop the record vibrating completely, there are inherent problems. One is that the vibration gets any vibration or movement here, and it will be tiny, but plastic is compressive, it's springy, okay,
yeah.
and in a very high frequency it gets springy. That is fed back straight into your stylus. So it's just the energy is reflected straight back into your stylus rather than being allowed to go out.
Right. So it doesn't
It's a
actually
complex
escape.
picture.
It's more like it needs somewhere to escape, and rather than moving away from the stylus, it goes to, it escapes through the stylus. Is that kind of what you're saying?
No, it's reflected back into the stylus.
Okay. Okay.
But it's a good question. I mean, it isn't I don't want to get too far into the weeds on this because it is a complex mechanical problem.
Yeah.
And it's all a question of balance. Work with the theory that, oh yeah, we want the surface absolutely rigid, but it doesn't work. I mean,
Mm.
we've tested this and listened to it, and it just doesn't work in practice.
Yeah.
if people like an ultra controlled sound, and there are people that do. I mean, I'm not. If you want that kind of sound that's not actually real, true to life, then fine.
Mm.
That's a wonderful answer.
And it will be, super detailed resolution, but the dynamics and the kind of actual,
The microdynamics
yeah,
disappear.
the
Yeah.
things that make the instrument sound present.
Yes, complex harmonics, all of that sort of stuff, you lose.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
you're left with a slightly what people describe as a sterile sound, which doesn't have the rich texture that
yeah,
real music
yeah,
has.
yeah. Which to me isn't really listening to music; it's analyzing it almost.
Yeah.
That also kind of makes me think about when you. So I think what we're talking about is if you have a platter where the vinyl is kind of a suction platter and it's perfectly coupled to the platter, mass in a record weight can kind of have a similar effect because you're coupling the record to the platter. And then is that a problem if could it be a problem where you're further kind of coupling the record to the platter and all of the platter's vibrations and the bearings vibrations and that kind of stuff? Is that also a kind of an issue?
Very much so. Yeah, no,
Right.
it's a very logical argument because there is the downside that I think the suction method kind of assumes that the platter isn't vibrating,
Yeah.
whereas actually it is vibrating. And the reason it may not work could also well be put down to the fact that the platter is feeding the vibration of the
Yeah.
bearing and the
Yeah.
motor back into the
Yeah.
stylus directly through the vinyl.
Yeah. And I bring that up because having spent a lot of time making R bearings, it's hard to make a good bearing. And it's
Mm.
easy, there are so many bearings out there that actually have a lot of friction in them inherently that's feeding back
Y-
into the vinyl itself.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Yeah,
So
and it's huge. Bearing noise is you know
yeah,
you can't hear it, and it's unimaginable, but it's there big time. We found that very early on because we started using large radius balls, and I was shocked at the difference. Just making a difference to the radius of the ball made.
in the bearing.
Yeah, because the
Yeah,
contact area goes with a smaller ball. The contact area goes right down, and the bearing noise, massive difference in sound quality.
yeah, yeah. Hi, I'm quickly interrupting this video just to ask that if you're finding it worthwhile, please could you hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and also press the bell notification. It really helps us to carry on making these videos. And yeah, what we want to do is carry on having open conversations about vinyl replay and also giving you insights into how we've been making turntables and tone arms in-house in the UK since 1986. Well, not me personally, because I'm 31, and that's... Anyway, you get the idea. So, thanks, and back to the video. Maybe let's move into kind of talking about your experiences with record weights, because
Okay,
for a
yeah,
long
yeah.
time, record weights have been around for decades and decades, and for a long time, you didn't want to make one at all. You didn't believe in them.
It kind of puzzled me why people use record weights because I've been in this game 40 years and every time I tried them, they didn't sound better. The bass always improved, but the mid range and just the general coherence of the music, I could never listen to them. Particularly the timing goes right out. If
Mm.
you're into timing, putting a record weight on is usually very bad news. Um, the kind of aha moment came when we were at a show sharing a room with another distributor called Audio Reference, and they'd brought along their very expensive Shunmook record weight, which was, I mean, now they retail for in the UK for £3,800, nearly £4,000.
Hmm.
Um, there are interestingly at least three or four other record weights that inhabit that territory now.
Yeah, they're kind of
But
the
at this
price of a
show
turntable.
but at this show, that was the only one I was aware of. And, Martin Brewster, who was the guy who owned Audio Reference, was saying, or you must keep using the record weights. And I listened to it and I was shocked because actually it made it sound better, which I was very surprised by. And so that got me thinking really. And I was thinking, why on earth can this record weight improve the sound of the record, whereas others don't? One of the things I noticed about it was that it was not a particularly heavy weight, and it was
Right.
clearly conditioning the record rather than trying to flatten it. I mean, you would not flatten a record with the Shunmook record weight because
Right.
it's too light. So that got us thinking, and we started experimenting with various record weights. And also, this was very much in conjunction. I have to give credit here to a chap called Tony Sharman
Yeah.
because
Shout out, Tony.
I mean, he manages about 4 web forums and fantastic guy, been in the business for a long, long time, sold to people like Michael Caine, the Stones, you name it, really experienced guy, out of the box thinker, fantastic innovation. So anyway, he was feeding me with various ideas, which we were trying and evaluating. And we came up with all sorts of ideas along the way. One was
So
using,
that's loud. So what does that have in it?
this has got a series of, it's a mixture of ball bearings and other types of ball bearings because you get
Mhm.
plastic ball bearings and all
Mhm.
types. So we tried various mixtures of.
That is one of the heavier prototypes, isn't it?
Oh, it is.
So
Yeah.
we are talking about mass and stuff, but we have tried extensively adding mass and seeing what happens.
Yeah. Yeah. Whatever we did, 70 grams is the magic figure.
Okay.
Whatever you
Okay.
do, whatever you do, either side of that, it goes.
Yeah.
And this is why I think that you see some very heavy weights on the market. And I mean, I'm still open to being convinced, obviously, but I've never heard a heavyweight yet that doesn't kill the mid range and
Mm.
treble.
We've made, this isn't the only heavy one. We made some really
Yeah.
heavy ones,
Yeah.
like
It's
kilograms.
it's just, the way it is, and you can't fight it. Once you hear it, once you heard it, you can't unhear it. So that was one of the options we tried, and this is another quite heavy weight which we tried, full of various things.
Yeah.
But our real breakthrough came in discovering what we'd describe as layer technology. I mean, these first of all, let's go into this because Stack Audio came up with a weight which was reckoned as very, very good.
Yeah. Theirs is also very lightweight
Yeah.
in a kind of similar vein to ours, and they use microparticles inside, which are a bit lighter.
Yeah. And it's also on a suspended
Yeah.
drum skin, isn't
Yeah.
it?
It's a really clever design.
So
Like,
all
it's a really interesting design.
all the balls kind of bounce around on this drum skin in vibration. So they're happily bouncing up and down and into each other, of course. And that
Yeah, this is like
loses
filled
energy.
with stuff.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
that loses energy. One of the most difficult things in designing to absorb energy is you want energy to go one way generally. And how do you get the energy to, like if you've got your record weight, how do you get this is your surface which is rippling. How do you get the energy to go in and stop it coming out?
Mm.
And you can obviously, absorption is the easiest way, but you're still going to encounter a fair amount of reflection.
Mm.
So one of the things that we do is we put in a lot of layers between the energy coming in and out, just to prevent that from happening. So in other words, we're not relying on a one hit suspension here to get rid of to absorb the energy. We rely on a multiple of layers through, and we've spent, oh goodness me, it's just, we have spent
I will show some of the
two solid,
prototypes.
best part of 2 solid years
Mm.
listening to countless prototypes. Getting that mix right
Mm.
is a matter of trial and
Yeah.
error. You can't, I mean, you could theoretically model it in Fourier analysis, but I think that you'd spend so long kind of trying to create the right model, that you'd never arrive.
Yeah, and models and reality are two completely different things as well when you
Yeah,
actually listen to
yeah.
something that's been modeled. And it's interesting what you pick up on there because I think so often in hi-fi we there's kind of a rush to a miracle material. So, even in stuff like driver design in speakers or stuff, carbon fiber, and then it was, paper mesh or then hybrid or all of this, beryllium dome tweeters or whatever. The same thing happens in tone arms, in turntables. So, like, for instance, Delrin, or we know it as a C tool. It is like a buzzword everywhere, is miracle material that has the perfect properties to,
Mm,
damp vibration and effectively. And we use Delrin, we have done for a while, and it is a good material. But there's no one miracle material, right? And throughout all of our designs, you kind of, with a lot of influence from Tony Sharman, you've been using layered multiple materials. Can you kind of go into a bit of
yeah,
why that helps?
it's basically it's noise interference, really. If you've got two surfaces, they'll resonate at different frequencies. So if you're using, say, one material here which vibrates at a high frequency, and another material here which is vibrating at, say, a much lower frequency, when those two layers are brought into contact with each other, this will tend to affect the vibration of this.
So that's
And it'll just
negative
it's just
interference.
noise cancellation,
Yeah.
basically. So if you use the right materials and the right mix and combination, then you can tailor the way that the weight absorbs the sound. And this is I mean, some people may be very skeptical about this. This is very real. When we listen to this stuff, you can really hear how you can control the sound on the record. Some weights will dampen the treble completely,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
your treble will just
Yeah.
disappear. Others will your the treble will be harsh and aggressive. So yeah, it does make a difference.
Well,
And
I've got a bit of a example of this. So I remember we were testing between the Gravity 1, which was our first weight, and the Gravity 2. And we were beginning to look at, okay, shall we try adding mass? Because the Gravity 1 did what we wanted it to do in terms of it was like a no harm product. It didn't harm any of the frequencies. It added detail, it added a bit of natural bass extension,
mm,
but it kind of wasn't. We were happy that we'd made a weight that improved performance, right?
yeah,
But it wasn't quite where we wanted it to get, which is why we spent so long developing the two. But I remember one of my test tracks at the time was Mini Ripperton. It was Loving You on this album.
very
Um,
delicate track.
yeah, so Mini Ripperton has a 5 octave range in her voice. So yeah, I think it's called the whistle register, super rare, and she can sing incredibly high, but
Mm,
also has this record is very airy. There's a lot of top end. And what I noticed whenever we were trying to add a lot of mass, it's like the whole frequency band just got bracketed down. It's like all of the top end kind of openness and lightness just shifted down.
mm,
And okay, sure, we got a bit more bass, but there was so much to her voice that you lost, that you're not really, you're no longer kind of listening to Minnie Riperton perform at her best, where she reaches into those upper registers and you need the openness and lightness. And you've just benefited a little bit in the bass. So that's kind of what I heard in.
yeah, I mean, you're one of these people that obviously listens to everything in a record. There are people who just listen to the bass, I'm
Yeah,
convinced.
yeah. And I mean,
And that's why they love these heavy weights.
and I don't think we want to, are there cases where heavyweights, people will want to use heavyweights for the performance of a heavyweight.
Yeah, it's a tricky one now. I would say maybe 5%, 5% people, another maybe everyone else, maybe some people don't actually listen to the difference of the weight on, weight off. They just think it's an
Hmm.
automatic thing to do. It's interesting that when Paul Rigby, the audiophile man, otherwise known as,
Yeah,
he did a review on on our Gravity One, and he compared it to, I think, about 15 other weights.
it was quite a few. I don't know if it was
Yeah,
15, but it
it was a
was a
lot. It
bunch.
was a
Yeah.
lot, and he came out very much in favour of the Gravity One, which is this. This has 10 components inside it. We've reduced that to 8 with our Gravity 2, but the Gravity 2 is heaps better than the Gravity 1. But the Gravity 1 was very, very good,
Yeah.
and it only got overtaken briefly by the Stack Audio
Hmm.
bouncing grains for a
I think
while,
the
and
Serene,
then
it's called.
but we were actually working on the Gravity 2 at the time. We didn't bring out the Gravity 2 just because this thing had beaten us by a very narrow margin in Paul's review, but we were working on this because we wanted to improve this in any way,
Yeah, and
and
we
this
thought
was
that
a
we could.
huge huge improvement,
I
and
think.
that took the number one spot again in Paul's review.
Yeah.
And Paul listens to an awful lot of record weights. He's very thorough in that respect,
Well, one of the other
and he's got good
things
ears too.
between them is you said this has 10 components and this has 8, but actually this has 9 screws and this has 4. And
Mm.
that might seem like not a lot, but every one of those screws is something that can carry vibration and reflect vibration. So
Well,
it was
yeah.
quite you know, it's quite a different design.
It is. I mean, one of the biggest differences is that this only rests on the center. In other words, that area there, that
Hmm.
moving triangle. But the Gravity 2 is completely different in that it rests on not only a center stack of layers, but also this, which is a very refined development of an outer body. And that plops onto the record and actually also helps to absorb vibration. Again, hundreds of materials we could make this out of, and we got
Well,
most of which don't work, but we did finally find one which did.
and I remember there's some things that, you develop really purposefully, and then some things you stumble across. And
Yeah,
the we'd gone through all of the layers, we'd got them, it was sounding good. And then Luke, who's my brother, chief engineer here, he just randomly experimented with putting the outer case body in contact as well. And, it's almost against the philosophy that we were running
absolutely.
with,
Yeah, yeah,
but it sounded better, which is kind of frustrating, but also good because we end up with a better sounding product.
yeah. A lot of the best breakthroughs are pure accidents or mistakes.
Happy mistakes.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I mean, while I was talking about Paul Rigby, it would be worthwhile just clarifying what he heard in his review. So I'm just going to read out. Please look at the podcast, The
Yeah,
Audiophile
we'll
Man
link
on the
that in
Gravity
the
2.
comments.
And he says the result that with the Gravity 2, music was much more coherent. This was down to a reduction of noise and vibration. Hence, high frequency noise no longer got in the way. It no longer filled the gaps in the music or distorted the presentation. Both mid range and treble sounded clearer, removing a slight edge from the upper mids, offering better clarity, improved focus from guitars and secondary percussion. Vocals provided improved diction, so I could better hear the lyrics now. The stereo image was solid and better focused, while the bass offered more impact. And that's the hard one, is often to get the bass better defined, more weight, and that is the trick without having to add a ton of weight.
So thanks for watching. If you have any questions or comments, please leave them down below. One way for you to try the Gravity 2 is to order it. We have a 30-day money-back guarantee. We have stockists up and down the UK and around the world who are also prepared to make that guarantee as well. Although the price might seem high at first, this is easily equivalent to a cartridge upgrade and will also last a lot longer. So please do take us up on that money back guarantee and try it for yourself. Anyway, thank you very much for listening and I look forward to seeing you in the next one.